Yes.
Okay. So just a little bit of a procedural overview that I'll give this staff presentation followed by a recommendation, and then the applicant will have an opportunity to speak, and then it will be open to the public at that point. The commission will hear, the commissioners will hear public comments at that point. So that's just generally how we'll run through. And I'm going to go through this pretty quick, simply because all the information is in the staff report. And I want to make sure that we have time for the dialogue, but we can always come back to any of the details if you have any questions. So just from a background standpoint, this is a similar application that was looked at a couple of years ago, where the Planning Commission denied the application in November of 2018. The Board of County Commissioners approved the application in December of 2018. There was a lawsuit filed, and in October, the court vacated the approval and remanded it back to the town to be reviewed. It was a procedural decision. And then, so what has happened since then is that the new code has been completed and updated, and we're following those procedures. So that's how we got to the application again. As you can see, the natural resource exploration, extraction, and production use is a conditional use in the AR district. So that's why we're here today with a conditional use permit, as well as these are the procedures, and you can see where those yellow circles are. That's where we are in the process. Oh, I'm sorry, actually it's step 8. The Planning Commission was last week. So we're at that step 8 in the process. Some basics on the application. Tomas O'Rourke with O'Rourke Extraction, Excavating is the applicant. William Schoan is the owner of the property. The application was received in March, sent to referral agencies in April. We did receive some of those comments, and they're included in the staff report that was sent to the board. It was published in the newspaper and sent to adjacent property owners. The Planning Commission held their public hearing on June 16th, and here we are today with the Board of County Commissioners. The big items away from here are that the property is zoned agricultural ranching, AR. It's approximately 295 acres, and it's within the South Fork growth area. So it's about a few miles east of South Fork. You can see with that star is approximately where that the site is located. Some of the general site analysis, the overall site, the operation site, so not the property. The property is the overall property owned by Mr. Schoan. That's about 300 acres, 295. The operating site that we'll be referring to is about 7.74 acres, and located setback about 1,700 feet from the road to the north, centrally located on the property, about 1,400 feet from the ditch, the Anaconda Ditch, so there are two processes that the applicant has to go through. One is the conditional use permit through the county, but then they need to get a mining permit through the state, the Division of Reclamation, Mining, and Safety. That application and permit hasn't been, or the application hasn't been applied for yet or submitted, and the applicant is planning on doing that following, assuming that they get approval from the county. So that'll be the second step in that. That'll be done after. And you'll see that we have some conditions associated with that. So just a graphical image of approximately where the site is located on the property. The closest setback is approximately about 550 to 600 feet on the kind of that south east side of the operation area. And I just simply wanted to give this as a reference of how it's situated on the property in reference to the property lines. The proposal is to have to have 3 phases. They'll start in the south and move north, and each phase is anticipated to be between 3 and 4 years. At full operation, the applicant is anticipating 2 to 3 employees on the site and an average of 5 trucks per day. Approximately 225,800 cubic yards of material is anticipated to be mined. I just want to point out that in the staff report, we have that incorrectly referenced as square footage. It's actually cubic yards. And then water for the production, including dust mitigation and, for the production itself, is being secured from multiple offsite sources. And I will, if there are more questions on the water, the applicant can probably be better to answer those questions. A stormwater master plan has not been required by the county at this point because of the topography and the distance from other water sources. However, we do have, I mentioned it here, and it's a condition that staff is recommending that if DRMS requires additional stormwater management and mitigation, then the applicant will have to submit that to the county prior to commencing the operation. For the reclamation plan, they are anticipating that within 2 to 3 years of seeding, 1 to 2 years of seeding, the property will be able to be grazed again with cattle and livestock. So again, we have a reclamation plan that was submitted and reviewed. If those are substantially changed through the DRMS review process, then we would just want to see that and make sure it's consistent with what we're seeing at the county. So as I mentioned, the next steps that will be needed are a state of Colorado DRMS permit, and that will also include additional referral agencies, state agencies, and as well as federal, as well as a review of the reclamation plan and the operation plan itself. EPA standards and oversight also does apply. The air pollution standards apply to windy days and the dust mitigation, and EPA through the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment would be responsible for managing, overseeing, and enforcing those standards. So we have received quite a few public comments. There's a list that we received prior to the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, the 16th. And then we have received a few, 3 here on the right side of comments after the Planning Commission public hearing. And so just to kind of go through, again, I don't want to get too specific, all of those have their own concerns, but I tried to summarize them into larger categories of general themes that were commented on, and reduced property value, increased truck noise, traffic, and dust were big ones. Questioning the extended hours, and kind of just some confusion on the process. Thought we heard this before. Why are we hearing it again? And then just maybe some requests to limit some of the use and impact a little bit more. And of course, I'm sure we'll talk more about these issues in detail through the public comment portion. So with that, the application, the commission has to find that these criteria 1 through 7 are met in order to approve a conditional use permit. In addition, that the operational standards for a sand, soil, and gravel extraction operation need to be met. So with all of that, staff is recommending approval with these 4 conditions, and I'll go ahead and read them into the record. So staff recommends approval of the CUP with the following conditions. 1, if DRMS or any other state or federal agency determines additional information is necessary to understand, evaluate, and mitigate impacts of this operation on water quality through their review, the applicant shall provide any information submitted to those state or federal agencies to the Rio Grande County Land Use Administrator for review prior to commencing operations on the site. 2, if DRMS or any other state or federal agency determines an amended reclamation plan is required, the operator shall provide such updated reclamation plan to the Rio Grande County Land Use Administrator for review and evaluation prior to commencing operations on the site. 3, the issued DRMS permit shall be provided to the Rio Grande County Land Use Administrator prior to commencing operations on the site. And 4, any other permits or approvals required by DRMS to be obtained by the operator shall be obtained and provided to the Rio Grande County Land Use Administrator prior to commencing operations on the site. So as I mentioned, on June 16th, the Rio Grande County Planning Commission held their public hearing on this application, and they recommended approval with those 4 conditions by a vote of 5-0. And that is the recommendation that has been brought forward to the county commissioners. So today, following this public hearing, the options that the county commissioners have is to approve the application as submitted, approve the application with conditions, deny the application, or continue the application discussion to a date certain. So that is the quick and dirty of the application. And I'd be happy to answer any questions that commissioners might have of me at this point before we open it to the applicant.
Commissioners, do you have questions?
What am I on anything besides phone?
You're on phone, Gene. Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm fine on my end, John. Sorry.
Thank you, Gene. Suzanne, I can't see you, Suzanne, with the screen up. So what?
I'm fine for right now.
Okay, good enough. TJ, then we can open it up to the applicants. Are the applicants on, Trish?
That would be a Dixie question.
So Rebecca, I believe, is with the applicant. So Rebecca, do you have a presentation, or is there anyone here planning on giving a presentation for the applicant? No.
Are the applicants in the room, in the commission?
Yes, they're in the room here, John.
We have them here in the room.
Okay. Would any of the applicants like to speak to this?
I'm Tom O'Rourke, O'Rourke Excavating, and Bill and I are just trying to keep this ranch a ranch. We're actually improving the land for irrigation and hay crops and grazing cattle, rather than chop it up into a subdivision or something of that nature, like River Island Ranch did, or surrounding areas. We're both part of the community for a long time, and run this pit and this extraction in a responsible way. Bill, do you have anything?
No, just as I've stated to the land use board, my primary concern, as I've already mentioned, is improve the hay grazing ground. We got humps on the property that are full of rock, and they'll be processed and dirt put back in the hole. Hopefully I end up with a relatively level piece of ground that, a new pivot we're planning on putting in that's gonna cover that area. It'll double the amount of hay ground we have now. And we'll have enough gravel to put on we have a pretty extensive driveway system, about 1.5 miles of driveway that all it needs is roadbed on it, and it's right there, so we won't have to haul it from outside in. And then Tom can use whatever he needs over the period of time that he needs it. The object wasn't to make a whole bunch of money on a gravel pit. The object was to improve the ranch land.
Can you hear them okay?
I
No.
can.
Okay.
Okay, do the applicants have anything else they'd like to say at this point?
Not this time, but I'm willing to answer any questions that anyone has.
Okay. Like I said, this hearing won't be quite as formal as normal, to make sure that we do get all the questions answered here. So at this point, TJ, do you have anything else before we open it up to the public hearing portion of this, the public comment?
Nope, I think we can go ahead and open it and continue the hearing.
Okay. Then we would open it up. It's a little hard to manage on computers like this, so let's just courtesy, don't interrupt each other, step on each other. But I will open it up now for the public comment, and when you begin to speak, if you would please identify yourself.
Well, my name is Dave Barber, if I can have the floor for a moment.
Yes, Dave, we'll recognize you.
Thank you, sir. I'm one of Bill's neighbors. We share property lines. And I know you have my letter, and I hope you've read it. It covers a number of things, but today I'll focus on 3 areas that ask the commissioners to consider. One thing you may hear about is the residential nature of surrounding properties. And I'd ask the commissioners to consider who surrounded who. This ranch has been there a long time, and the subdivision developments that have preceded are great for the economy. But many of the residential areas are still aspirational in nature, such as River Island Ranch. There are 57 lots, and they're currently paying taxes on an agricultural basis. And they've been plotted for 13 to 15 years. The application is for potentially a 15-year short-term project, and so perhaps they'll be done before anything is built on some of these neighboring properties. The second thing I'd like to address is traffic. You'll hear from concerned individuals about increased traffic on roads, and that's totally understandable. The applicant currently has 300 acres and maybe has 3 family vehicles. That 300 acres could overlay Lower Alpine, and we don't have a traffic limit in that area. The River Island Ranch, 57 lots down below, they will have construction traffic of their own when they do build, and additional family cars, trailers, ATVs, other things. So there will be more traffic on the county roads, and I'd ask the commissioners to consider, why would this landowner receive less consideration for use of county roads than all surrounding properties? And lastly, I'd like to point out that this applicant's 300 acres do need to be something. And the applicant has stated they want to keep it a single family ranch by using less than 3% of it for this gravel pit. The applicant's long-term vision of a continued open space and agricultural land is a benefit to all surrounding properties and the county, and is consistent with the master plan. I'll remind the commissioners that since 1998, We've got amended resolution 9818, which is a right to farm and ranch. And what that means to me as a landowner is that I chose to live here near a ranch, even though I might be surrounded by dust, noise, use of county roads by machinery. And I think Bill's vision for keeping it a single family ranch is in the best long-term interest of all nearby property owners, is consistent with the master plan. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Dave, for your input. Next.
This is Mark Craig.
Thank you, Mark. Go ahead.
Yes, I assume you've read the letter I sent, so I'm not going to go into a whole lot of detail, but there's a few things I'd like to address. Some of the things that Mr. Barber said, mentioned this, wanting to keep it as a ranch. This is not being kept as a ranch. It's being turned into an open pit mining operation. And the increased traffic is not just normal traffic of cars and light trucks. It's heavy trucks hauling gravel on and off that property. The other thing I wanted to mention is I kind of question why the county would want to do something like this that benefits exactly two people to the detriment of all the nearby landowner or property owners. And the way I see it, to detriment of the rest of the residents of the county, because it's going to hold down the growth of this part of the county. The other question I have is, what exactly is being voted on here? I haven't seen any kind of draft of a permit that actually details the conditions. As far as I can tell, the only conditions that are being placed on this is they get the other approvals needed from state and federal authorities. There's no conditions that limit the size of the operation, the duration of it, the hours of operation, any of those things. No requirements for dust mitigation, noise mitigation. Excuse me. So it's hard for me to tell exactly what's being voted on here, so that we can know what's going to happen. So those are the questions and the concerns I have. Most of the other things that I'm concerned about have been mentioned, but I'd like to hear some discussion of exactly what's being voted on and why we do that, why we would do that to benefit two people to the detriment of so many other. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. We'll try to get to the questions rather than open up just an exchange back and forth right now. I'm trying to keep notes here. I assume somebody else is, so we'll try. Gwen, I see you're unmuted. Do you have comment?
Yes, I do. First of all, when Mr. Schoan and Mr. O'Rourke are in there together and not speaking into the computer, I can't hear it. I'm hearing impaired. I've made that point to several people in the county, and they're still sitting there not at a computer. I know there's one in the room somewhere. It would be beneficial if they would speak individually into the computer. The other question I have a question about being posted in the Monte Vista paper. I read the minutes from the last meeting that you had on the gravel pit, and Mr. Glover stated that it would be posted in the local paper if it was of local concerns, and it was not. It wasn't published in the South Fork paper. There's a free South Fork paper that it could have been published in, and it was not. So therefore, most people aren't aware of what's even going on today. I assume you've read both of my letters. I sent one to the P&Z and I sent one to the county commissioners. I don't see how this meets any of the criteria, and no one has addressed the fact that how does it? I mean, it's pretty obvious that the traffic is a concern. You've got people walking on 15. You've got people riding bicycles on 15. You've got a boat ramp at the bridge that turns off on to 19 to 160. Noise, dust. No one's explained how these things are being mitigated or how they're not going to affect my property. And Mr. Barber's talking about property that's I live here. I'm already a house. I'm not really, so it affects me now. The windy days, it just says they won't operate on windy days. What's a windy day? I mean, to me, every day in South Fork's a windy day. There's just too many open-ended questions. And as I think Mr. Craig said, there's no limits on the operation. There's no time limit, hours of operation, number of trucks. The best guess is 5. How many trips a day is that? Who knows? To me, there's just too many open-ended questions, and there's no data given to any of the concerns that have been voiced.
Gwen, thank you. I don't want to get into a back and forth. I understand you could not hear the applicants. Is that correct?
No, I could not hear the applicants.
So you don't know what they said then?
I do not.
Okay.
Know what anybody at the P&Z said either.
Okay, I understand. As far as publications, we are following state statute. The county is on publications. We're not modifying it. An individual commissioner may have said something, expressed an opinion, but that does not reflect either the statute or the procedures of the board. So that's what we do. If you'll notice, many of the counties in the valley use the Valley Courier as their official record, which would not cover South Fork unless you subscribe to that particular paper, and it is legal. We chose as commissioners to use a more local paper, part of Valley Publishing. And so we have done that, and that is within our authorities. There's no requirement that we just randomly publish stuff out there because somebody might be interested. So there's that. The other concerns, many of these things are controlled, and this is for everybody, regulated by the EPA, Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, and also Division of Reclamation and Mining. And so our area of concern as commissioners is not to try to come in and do their job for them. We are here to approve or disapprove based on the application and does it comport with the regulations that are in place. And under ag ranching, it's my understanding that this is a permitted use with a conditional use permit. The fact that we have many, many homes or home sites subdivided around there, and that some of these have been languishing on the market, we can argue about the demand for those properties and what have you. But we're here right now to address Ms. Patterson's concerns. Why are we having this meeting? What is it for? It is to determine whether or not this application is consistent with existing federal, state, and county regulations. So I'll open it up now for somebody else who wants to speak.
John, this is Gene, can I have the floor for just a second?
Yes.
I want to make sure everybody understands, your comment was that an individual commissioner can't make a declaration of where it's going to be advertised. And to Gwen's, Ms. Patterson's statement, my recommendation was that my statement was that it would be in our local paper, which, as you stated, is the Monte Vista Journal. That wasn't stated as it was going to be in a particular paper like South Fork or Down or anything else. So I did not misstate. I just used the reference we always use.
Thank you, Gene. I appreciate that. Other comments?
Could somebody define a dusty day?
The EPA does.
Or a windy day, excuse me. Is there a definition of such?
That's an eye of the beholder. Depends on where you live. If you live in the San Luis Valley, we have a lot of wind. And we consider.
When Mr. O'Rourke states in his application he will not operate on a windy day, what does he mean?
I don't know what it means.
Here, second, Tom wants to respond.
On high winds. I mean, in the morning, like this morning, it was calm. There's no wind at all. In the afternoons, generally, the wind picks up. And And if it's extremely windy, we'll use our own judgment, be respectful to everyone, and won't operate. We put crushed gravel on the driveway going in and out of the pit, which reduces all dust rather than just have dirt. Currently, because they can't irrigate that farm properly without a pivot, it's a lot more dustier now than it will be. But it's a judgment call, and you know, I feel we all have to coexist. And if you have any concerns, you're more than welcome to call me or Bill, and we can work
That
it
you
out.
can't hear, because that's been brought up. People can't hear. I'm saying my husband can't.
Did you, Ms. Patterson, did you hear his comment?
Yes, I could hear that. Thank you very much for the accommodation.
Okay, thank you. Other comments, folks? Again, I'm going to try to stay away from the dialogue, but again, keep it as informal as possible, but and show courtesy to each other. So do we have another comment?
No, not at the moment.
Thank you. Others?
I do, if I can be called upon.
Yes, Ms. Lang.
My name is Julia Lang, yes. Just briefly for my reasons, but my husband is hard of hearing. He cannot hear this meeting. He could not hear earlier, but now we did just hear Mr. O'Rourke, just to confirm that. I have a little rebuttal to Mr. Barber. For the record, he was talking about the age of the homes surrounding the property. We are an adjacent parcel to Mr. Schoan's parcel, and our place has been there since 1910. I obviously have not lived there since 1910, but anyway, so I don't know when that ranch was established, but we have been established there since 1910, just for the record. And I completely agree with Mr. Craig and Ms. Hughes's views. And that is all I will say. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next. I see that Luana is unmuted, but we haven't heard anything from over there. Is there a comment?
I would just like to stay. Can you hear me?
Yes, can you give us your last name, please?
DeWeese.
Okay, yes, ma'am.
We have not built, and neither has anyone else, on the parcels at River Island Ranch because we don't have water. The standards were that we had to be on a community water system. That development went into bankruptcy, and the bank owns the water system. So we've owned that property for many years, would love to build on it, but the only reason we have not was because of the litigation and that we have no water.
I understand. And you're concerned about the gravel pit in relation to building there?
I just don't want to live next to a gravel pit. That's just my own selfish want.
That's okay.
Honestly.
Okay. Thank you for your input there. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anybody else on the call who has a comment at this point? Hearing none, I'm going to open this up, Commissioner's comment. My suggestion is it's always difficult to make a decision right after a public hearing because we hear new information or something to think about. And we're trying, I'm hoping that we can take a little bit of time and delay the vote on this until a later date so that we have a chance to review. I have personally read the letters that were sent in, both in support and in opposition to this. And personally have considered those concerns, but I would like to have the vote, if it's the other commissioners concur with this, that we do not vote on this today, rather that we vote at our next scheduled meeting next week. Comments on that, please?
I guess that'd be okay with me.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I too have read the letters and looked through everything, but I think a little bit of time to digest what came up in the meeting this morning would probably help, but I don't want this to be a kick down the road issue. I think we need to make a definite attempt to solve it, so the next meeting would probably be fine.
Okay, and by doing this, I think on TJ's presentation, it talks about a date certain for actions. So we would set this for our next commissioners meeting, which would be next Wednesday, if I'm correct on that. Trish, is that correct?
That is correct.
Thank you. So we'll set it for that meeting, and we will hold a vote on that at that time. I do have a question for Dixie. On those subdivisions that are surrounding the property, I was noticing on the map that TJ put up that there's the ranch sitting there and then a whole bunch of what appear to be just residential lots. What are the zonings for those areas?
I would have to pull up a map, John, and to verify that, which I can't do while I'm online here, but my recollection on them is that most of them are zoned residential when they were subdivided.
So they were zoned residential. They're not an ag zoning then?
I do not believe so, no.
Okay, thank you. And then the other is the River Island Ranch is still operating under an ag, as an ag property, not a residential?
I believe that's an assessor's question there. I think what they referred to is they are being taxed and paying taxes as agricultural property. I will try and get those answers for you before the next meeting.
Thank you. And that's something that probably we need to be looking at. If it's zoned residential and being used for ag and grazing purposes and getting the associated tax benefit, that may be something the county needs to look at on that one. Yes, Ryan.
You mind if I ask a couple questions of the applicants and of the participants, just to make sure that the record is clear before this hearing is adjourned?
No, I don't mind at all. And for those of you who may not know, Ryan Dunn is the county attorney. Go ahead, Ryan.
Yes, thank you, John. Just for the applicants, and I'm not sure if Mr. O'Rourke would be the best person to answer, so I really don't have a preference, but Mr. Craig brought up concerns about the duration of the project. Can you state for the record what your anticipated duration of this project would be?
This is Tom speaking. I think we're applying for a 15-year permit, but ideally we want to finish this up as quickly as possible to get it back into ranch land and productive hayland. Ideally, if it'd be 4 or 5 years, that'd be great. But like in the planning and zoning, someone brought up, if you have a pandemic and it shuts down the economy and slows everything down, that's where the extended period of time might come into play.
Okay, so are you saying that you don't necessarily anticipate operating for the full 15 years, but are asking for some leeway?
Correct, yes.
Okay. There were also concerns addressed by Mr. Craig regarding dust mitigation. What are your plans for dust mitigation, if any?
Well, like I said, with the clean crushed gravel on the haul road and as well as in the pit, it reduces quite a bit of dust. You could drive by these existing gravel pits and you'd be surprised how there's almost no dust coming off of them. During production, when they're crushing the gravel, we put water on it, so it's zero dust coming off the conveyors, and that's part of a mining what they require. Right now, where there's no irrigation on that 295 acres on the upper part, it's a lot dustier than a 7-acre gravel pit.
Okay, and the water that would be used for that dust mitigation, where would that be sourced from?
I've sourced it from different places. One is the golf course that they sell us water. They have an abundance of water. We hook onto a fire hydrant. For one period of crushing, it's about 8,000 gallons. I've also bought it from other contractors who have water trucks. So it's not a lot of water during production. It's just water that's misted on the crushing equipment and the conveyors to have a zero dust policy.
So you would purchase that water, you wouldn't be drilling on the property?
Correct.
Okay. What about noise mitigation from the crushers?
Well, I mean, they do make noise, and it's probably crushing 3 weeks every other year. It wouldn't be somewhere we have a crusher set up all the time. We might have a screen in there just to screen some material, but that's pretty quiet. But you definitely will hear jaw crusher and cone crusher when they are crushing. But like I said, 2 to 3 weeks a year, every other year, unless there's more of a call for gravel, and it's every year. But 2 or 3 weeks out of the year, and it's usually in the fall.
Okay. And then if I may ask a question of, thank you, Mr. O'Rourke. If I may ask a question of Ms. Patterson. She raised a couple of issues. One specifically, that she was concerned that the application did not meet any of the criteria. And Ms. Patterson, if you feel like I'm misquoting you, please correct me. But I'm just curious if there were any specific criterion that you thought were not satisfied as part of this application process that the board should consider.
In my letter that was sent to the county commissioners, 1, 2, and 3, I don't know enough about to comment on. I specifically stated that it did not meet, I believe it's 4, 5, 6, and 7. And then I think in section 7, and I can't pull my letter up and talk to you at the same time, I'm not that good. I believe it was, let's see if I can, and on number 7, there was one of them that about the residential and recreational, because there is a lot of recreation in that area. So there were the 3 point, or the 4, 5, 6, and 7 in Article 3, and then in Article 7, I want to say it was number 2, but it was one of the 3 criteria there.
Okay. So I guess I would assume that you're asking that the board look into those specific criteria in making their determination?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Did you have any specific recommendations to the board on what you might want them to consider in terms of those criteria or any of the other concerns that have been addressed?
Yes, I did. I made specific recommendations if they were going to approve the project or the application. I listed several suggestions to restrict it. The sun up to sundown, the number of trucks. I don't know how you mitigate the noise, but there's been no DBIs given, decibels. There's been nothing, I mean, everything I read says gravel pits are dusty, noisy, and create traffic problems. And I haven't seen anything in the application that says this isn't going to happen.
Okay, thank you. So essentially you're referencing back to your letter, and my recommendation to the board would be to incorporate any letters submitted as part of this record.
The other question, this is Mark Craig. The other question I had, are any of those issues you just mentioned and she just mentioned going to show up as conditions on the permit? Because I think that's what we're both wondering and asking for. Because right now, everything is open-ended as far as we can tell.
I'd let the chair handle that, but I think the appropriate course of action would be for the record to reflect that you made that request.
Basically, that's how we'll handle it. We can't offer any assurances on any specific issue. We will look at it. Like I say, there's no DBIs, decibel levels. There was questions about windy days. Many of these are very subjective concerns, eye of the beholder. And while we certainly listen to that and take it into consideration, we'll have to use best judgment on that going forward. Or as on that, the fact that those issues have been raised means they will be considered. You may or may not be happy with the results. I can't guarantee that because I just don't know. We will take it into consideration and go from there. I personally have lots of questions, but now's not the time or place to ask them. They're just general questions, like Lawana brought up the situation over there at River Island Ranch. Some of these things have been a thorn in the county's side for decades. And we're trying everything. We're doing our best to resolve all these issues, but some of them are just intractable, I'm sorry to say. And in the middle of COVID right now, if you've been reading the papers, you understand that we're dealing with lots of issues on that, which is making it, we're getting saturated. So we're going to buy a little time here so we can consider your concerns, genuinely consider them. I appreciate the fact that the county attorney has asked specific questions, and we will have our vote on it next week. We have about 10 minutes left before we have to adjourn this meeting. I want to give anybody else that has a question or a comment a chance to speak up.
I do. Okay, on the crushing, you said 3 weeks approximately every other year. And the hours of sun up to sundown, is that sun up to sundown on crushing as well as hauling?
Yes.
Okay. And then in your application, you said you'd prefer not to work weekends, but occasionally it's necessary, so it would not be planned, correct?
Yeah, correct. Some people call me Friday afternoon for topsoil for a garden or something like that because they can only work on weekends. And I tried putting them off till Monday. I certainly don't want to work on weekends either. But I try to accommodate everyone.
Okay. And the 7.7 acres, I believe, is that the maximum size that you're looking at?
Yes.
Okay.
And in that site, there's a 25-foot setback around the 7 acres, and then there's a, it's tapered down, so it's not just a big 7-acre hole.
Okay. And that would be done in 3 phases, correct?
Correct.
Of approximately 2-ish acres, and then whenever you finish that 2 acres or so, then you would go back and reclaim that and then start on the next one?
We wouldn't reclaim it right away because when you go to crush the second phase, you can have it crushed into the first phase where it'd be below grade and less visual. So we'd probably reclaim it probably at the end of the whole project. That'd be most feasible.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Glover, do you have anything to add?
No, I think we just need to get into the letters and do some studying and get our heads put together here and get this thing decided on.
Okay, thank you. Any of the other attendees have anything to say?
This is Dave Barber, just a procedural question. When you
Yes.
vote next week, will you be having additional public comment, or is this the closure of that public comment?
It's my understanding that the way we would handle it, this is the public hearing portion of the process, and the next step is the vote. If something comes up before the commissioners where we need to revisit it, I don't know if we can continue the process with more public hearings or if we have to reset the clock and start over. That I don't know. We'll talk to our attorney about that. But it's my understanding right now that next week we will do an up or down vote on this.
Thank you.
Is there anything else? If not, Trish, do we stay on this login for the commissioners meeting?
I think for recording purposes, it would be cleaner if we just log back on, but I would refer to Ryan on that.
I think it was different Zoom information that was sent out specific to this hearing. Although I do see others on who are department heads who are not necessarily, don't have any involvement in this hearing, so it may have been the exact same information. I would just make sure that the record is clear as far as this hearing goes, that we're adjourning this hearing and that the public comment and evidentiary period is over.
Okay, Trish, if you can confirm that the login is the same, and if there are no other comments on this, this meeting, the public hearing is adjourned. I want to thank everybody for participating and giving us the input, and I thank you for the consideration and respect that everybody showed. It makes it much easier. And then we will adjourn the public hearing on the Shane O'Rourke application. And we will then, in 5 minutes, commence the regular commissioners meeting for June 24th. Or we can take a 5-minute break.
And it is the same. So I will be logging off for recording purposes, but everyone else, I believe, should stay in place.
Okay, and if it messes up and we all get kicked off, we'll just all log back in. Thank you.
Thank you.